Welcome back to another episode of the Easy But Investor Podcast with myself, Colbert Johnson, and Tucker Merrihew. Today we are going into a topic that I think is relevant for everyone. I've seen this play out already in my now 10-ish year career, and that topic is how do you build a business? How do you build a mindset? How do you build a version of a real estate company that lasts not 3 years, not 5 years, but decades? Because that's where the real money's made. And we've said it often on this podcast. I believe it truly and internally that the first 3 to 5 years plus of any business, but especially the real estate business, isn't really where you make the big money. It's when you've been in something and mastered something for 10, 15, 20 years that you really start to get the compounding results of effort, of time in the game. Not to say you can't make money earlier. That's what I found for myself, now almost 10 years into business, starting to really kind of catch a groove. And you're not going to get rich in 3 to 5 years. And if you do, it's probably going to be built on a foundation that's a little shaky. So that's what we're going to dive into today. So I have Tucker with me. Tucker's had the actual ability to build and sustain a real estate company for a while now, decades now, not decades and decades and decades, but a few decades. Just to preface,
we'll call it 22 years, just a few, plus 2 decades plus 2.
Yeah, but Tucker, I'll kick it over to you to kind of answer the topic on your side on just the framing of what it means to be in this business long term and why I think starting with why you think most people fizzle out in 3 to 5 years.
Well, I'll start with, rich is relative, right? So people starting out their first 3 years, you can make money and think you're rich relative to like what you had before. I mean, I still remember, I thought I was rich when I printed out an ATM receipt and I showed one of my mortgage buddies. I was like, look, I got 20 grand. I was like, I am rich. It was the first time I'd ever, saved 20 grand. So, it's all relative. And, in the first few years of my career, I had some wins and I had some active income. We'll get into that as well. But, the first house that I ever sold, I made about $220,000 on it. It was tax-free money. And so at that point, I really did feel rich because that was significantly more than the $20,000, receipt from the ATM.
You 10x your bank account in one deal.
Yeah. But things like that, they're not a guarantee by any means. It was a decent buy at the time, and there was a huge upswing in the market. So if you happen to get into real estate during one of those times where the market's been flat or depressed for a while, and you do the right things, you can make quite a bit of money in a short period of time because that's usually how real estate works, right? Like values go up substantially for a short period of time, and then they flatline, or as we've seen, sometimes they can compress after that. But a lot of that equity that then if you convert it to cash within that window, you can make quite a bit of money in a short period of time. With that said, I have seen a lot of people make money in those high times and then fizzle out and disappear, right? Because number one, they thought they were rich and they spent all the money that they made and they didn't kind of reinvest it into the asset that helped them make that money. But number two is they never really figured it out, right? It was just kind of a luck thing. So, anybody listening going, oh, I've made a lot of money, in my first 3 years. It's like, sure, you can, but then it's like, how do you sustain that? And then how do you keep more of that money you make the next time around? Right. And I'm not saying like, don't go get, Starbucks coffee or whatever. I'm not one of those people that, says that's how you become, wealthy. You become wealthy just by getting smarter and smarter and smarter in how you do things over time. And if you like those little, perks throughout the day or throughout the week in your life, go for it, do it, no big deal there. So, the first thing I'll say is this, is that, you have to have clear vision in terms of what your active income lane is going to be. Right. And that's, people tend to jump around when the market's hot and they kind of get shiny ball syndrome and they're like, oh, I want to do this. Oh, I want to do that. Oh, I'm going to get into multifamily. Oh, I'm going to get into self-storage. I'm going to get, all these different things. And so for me, and I'll give this and I'll pass it back to you to see what you think, but I think having a defined active income lane that you're committed to becoming a category king in is probably the first step to sustaining, a long-term real estate business.
I love that. I think when you were talking about rich is relative, I remember being 19, just turning 19. We did our first deal. And I went to the title company, and I actually still have a photo of the bank receipt. It was $105,000 deal. So that was my big deal. So when you look at you can make a ton of money. Like for me, I thought I was retired. So you can make a ton of money even in your first couple deals. But what I didn't realize till later is one deal doesn't equal a business. Two deals doesn't equal a business. And if you can't sustain it and you can't replicate it over and over and over again, you don't have a business. You have a high paying hustle, which you can still make good money. And I think really the conversation, the topic I brought up about you really don't get rich in your first 3 to 5 years. I think rich for me, and I guess the way I internalize it, what I should communicate better is rich for me isn't like a number in your bank account. It's more like skills, relationships, and confidence in your business that you can do what made you money over and over and over and over again. And so to Tucker's point about, owning an active income lane, it takes a long time to really own an active income lane. And that's why jumping from flipping to wholesaling, developing over a period of 3 years destroys you, because you've never figured out and mastered how to replicate one thing at scale. And most of business, like you can't learn in a course. Like you can learn basics of like how to hire, but until you hire your first 20 people, you're not going to really know what a good hire is, what good onboarding is. Like that comes with reps. And there's an example. I got on a call last night with a client of ours who was kind of losing his mind because he's a year into the business and is really struggling to get consistency in reps. And most of the time, you guys, the answer is just where are your active working hours every single day. Like if you want to be in business for 2 decades, the frame to take is if myself or Tucker followed you around for a day, would we believe you were serious about that? Because for a lot of you guys, especially early on, it takes 8, 10, 12-hour days. Like eventually as you build your career, that you can have days and weeks where you're less engaged in work. But that's how I think about it for me. Like I have really big goals, and I often think about if someone was following me around that I respect all day, would they believe me that I'm serious about those goals? And if you can say yes to that question, you set yourself up to start building the skills to be around for a long time.
What's that book? I think it's something about 10,000 hours, right? You put in your 10,000 hours in whatever in the hell it is that you want to do it in, and then you become essentially an expert or somebody that can utilize that skill set, likely to make a living in whatever it is that you're doing, right? And so it just takes time to get that 10,000 hours. And I think, the other point is that, the gurus often pitch like, oh, I spend 2 hours a week in my business and I make, $300,000 a year, whatever it is. It's like, I don't know that that's it's definitely not a badge of honor. It might be later on in life, but you want to try and get that 10,000 hours done as quickly as possible, so that then you can be kind of a master of whatever that active income lane is for yourself within, especially if we're speaking in terms of real estate, obviously right now. And I don't know why people want to they want to leapfrog that. There's just, maybe it's just lazy. Maybe it's just the mantra that's been out there for a while, but really that's the most powerful part, about this business. Cause once you gain that, master's degree of sorts of real estate, then it is repeatable. Like you said, right? You can rinse and repeat. You can go anywhere and do exactly what you know how to do. Now it's going to take some work to rebuild and whatever, but you can go anywhere and you can, recreate what you've created before. Or if you had that one big deal for $105,000, right? Yeah. Well, you can create another one. It's not just like you were the circumstance of market upswing, luck, whatever. And that definitely doesn't make you rich. But to your point, having those skill sets can make you rich, whatever, you deem rich to be in terms of, monetarily, but, skill wise, you're definitely rich at that point.
Yeah. I remember it was cool for like 2 weeks. I showed all my buddies the bank deposit receipt. And then I remember sitting and I had bought in this, with some of the proceeds I had bought in this like used BMW 3 Series, and I'd gone in and like powder coated the rims black and all that kind of stuff. And I remember sitting there one day in the car and I'm like, man, like if I can't do this again, I might as well just go back to school. Like I don't want to be the one hit wonder, but yeah, I mean, I think Tucker, you brought up a good point there. One of the main reasons I think people suffer from kind of golden object syndrome, not getting their 10,000 hours, is because of social media, and not just social media as a tool, but social media as the reality of social media influence grows much quicker than business experience. And so you get these guys that are shouting get rich in 2 hours per day and stuff online, who've built a massive audience because they're good marketers, and they'll dye their hair and they'll say whatever, and they have no moral compass, and they'll go on stage with their chains on. Like those kind of guys, when they preach that, they've been in business for 4 years and they're good personalities, they're good marketing avatars. And so they build an audience. And then a lot of times I've found the best business operators don't have massive audiences. And if they do, they've come after decades of building a business. One of those guys, I watch a lot of his content, is Dan Martell, where he started building his social media audience in his 40s. But for the first 25 years of his career, he was building and selling businesses. And so I think a piece of this is it can absolutely derail you and destroy your business who you take your advice from. And so make sure you're not taking your advice on get rich in 2 hours a week from a guy that's 2 years into business who doesn't even have a track record in business. But I want to take this conversation in the direction of how does someone listening to the show, how do you guys out there in the land of listeners build a company that can sustain? Because we've talked a little bit about the things to avoid, but to me, the first thing to your point that we've discussed, gone back and forth on, is you have to choose a lane. You can't be the jack of all trades and get really, really, really good at what you do. For me, that was finding deals. And that'll evolve as your career goes. But then after you pick your lane, the couple other topics that I like to talk about is same thing, master a marketing channel, right? And we put out a show on this last week, but you don't need to go hire everyone, right? Start building your core team of 2 to 3, 4 people that can support you. Because once you have your market, and choose a market, once you have your market, your marketing channel, your asset class and lane, and your core team of 2 to 3, 4 people you really enjoy working with, who are bought in, who like what you're doing, that's how you sustain for a long time. And I know for me, when I've really kind of taken steps back in the business, it's when I've broken those rules in my real estate business. I've hired way too many people. I've gone to too many different markets. I've tried too many asset classes or exit strategies at one time. And that to me is how you end up in a spot where you're one of those guys that come and go in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think that's probably like it takes you to like the first 10 years or so of your real estate business, right? And during that time, you're working your ass off. Some years you make a lot of money, some years you don't, depending on market situations, whatever. I mean, it's not like it's a given that every year you're going to make a grip in real estate. It's even the best of the best have years where it's like, that year fucking sucked, right? But then they have other years that it was like, I killed it, right? So it's just kind of the way it works. But they live to play another day, and they just eventually. Sometimes you just can't fight the tides of the market, right? And you have to wait it out. And so, that kind of brings me to my next point, which is, if your active income lane is in a more challenging time period, which often it is, right? Like let's say right now, flipping, right? Finding people to sell your house or sell you their house is, I would say, probably at an all-time easy high right now for the last 6 or 7 years. Back in the real estate crash, it was easier because it was just more, it was just a really, really bad time. But the market's soft, generally speaking, in most parts of the country, right? And so when that's the case, it's easy to find people to say, yes, I'll sell my house for a discount, whatever they, deem the discount to be. The harder part is then turning that asset around and reselling it and making a good chunk of money on the other end that makes everything that you did worth it, right? So it's always a teeter-totter of what's easier. And then in a hot market, it's much harder to find those deals, right? You have to be much better at that skill set to find those deals at a bigger discount to then be able to turn it around, and you can sell it super easy to somebody that's going to overpay you for the finished product because there's limited inventory, everybody's got FOMO about real estate, whatever it is, right? So when you get to over time, you're going to be on this teeter-totter that kind of goes back and forth. And sometimes you're the benefactor of that, and sometimes you have to kind of just grind it out. And so, for those times that are just a little more difficult and to make your life and your business more predictable, I'm a huge advocate of actually owning a substantial amount of real estate over time for 2 reasons. Number one is, a lot of the money that I've made with real estate over the years, I now own a fair bit of real estate with, and that real estate kicks off rental income every month in fairly large amounts. And so, that gives you a hell of a peace of mind, but it also gives you like a constant in terms of revenue that you can use to either continue to fund your active income business, grow it, or, just not worry about having to lay people off or whatever, because you're having slower time with turning projects around and selling them or stabilizing, whatever it is. Right. And that's a big thing. Now not being in the Pacific Northwest and in, a very not landlord friendly environment, I like owning real estate, rental real estate a lot more down here in terms of, obvious reasons for that. But the second reason is, as you get better at this business, your active income will generally increase. You may have years that go down or more challenging years, but your active income peak that you make will continue. It's going to be a graph that looks like this, right? You may have some up and down in the middle, but it's going to go like that. And so as it goes like that, you kind of, the first few years you make a lot of money, you start stroking these huge checks for taxes, and you're like, damn, what in the hell? I could have used that money that could have been a big down payment on another property, or that could have, funded a massive expansion in the business, or whatever it is, right? But instead your, silent partner takes whatever they take, which is the US government. But by owning real estate, you're able to utilize depreciation and, a lot of the times accelerated depreciation. And if you're in this business for long enough, you're considered a real estate professional, which allows you to utilize depreciation and accelerated depreciation to offset any active income, which is such a huge thing. And that comes down to really understanding this asset class. Like a doctor, an anesthesiologist that makes $500,000 a year on a W-2 can go buy real estate, but he can't utilize any of the depreciation against his income because he's not deemed a real estate professional unless he goes and gets his wife to get a real estate license or does some sort of game like that. So it's such a huge advantage for us being in this as our, what we do for a living, to be able to utilize depreciation to basically offset dollar for dollar income that you create in your active income lane and pay zero taxes on it. And I don't think people understand that enough early on in their career. I think if they stick around long enough, they really start to get it. But that is truly the most powerful thing about being in the position we're in terms of being real estate professionals and finding deals and creating, income through that.
Yeah, I think the framing is you could say the first decade is about building active income, and then beyond that, it's about building wealth and stability and protecting that. You're not on TikTok, are you?
No.
So there's this TikTok that's going around where it's this guy at his desk, super dramatic music, and he has a photo frame that you'd keep pictures of your kids in, and he's staring at it, and it's I look at this every morning when I get to the office to remind myself of what I work for, and then the camera flips around and it's just a photo of the IRS. It's talking about your silent partner, but to Tucker's point, you guys, we talk a lot about kind of amateur versus professional. And to me, you're an amateur in this business when you are building up your active income. You're learning how to hire. You're learning how to do marketing. You're learning just how to run an active business. But that's very volatile. And my years have varied dramatically. And the one thing I've done well, even though it's a shit show, is I do have real estate that I've purchased throughout the years, because I've found that active income, one, it disappears. One way or another, active income disappears. If you're running a business, it disappears. And two, it's volatile. It's up and down. And so I'm now moving into that phase of my career, the second phase of how do you take a lot of active income and how do you build wealth with that? And at Tucker's point, that's how you stick around forever and become an investor, because eventually you're going to burn out on the do 30 flips a year, do 100 wholesale deals a year. Let's go. And you'll still do it. You'll probably eventually lean towards doing it in a more profitable, more leaned out way, at least most of you guys. But you need to find a way to take chips off the table to protect yourself, because you're going to have bad months. And if you can have bad months and still make payroll, the chances are you're going to be around a long time. If you can have absolute dog shit months and still pay all your bills and still feel good about your business because you've accumulated wealth that you can now protect. You have less of a tax liability because you're a real estate professional. You can now invest that money back into your company or into the wealth that you're building with real estate. That's, to me, where I see guys stick around forever. Even I know plenty of examples of guys that just do one thing, and every 2 years, and as much as a pain in the ass for the first 20 years or 15 years of their career, every 2 or 3 years, they're selling their primary residence to take $500,000 tax free. And they do that, and they buy another house that's a live and flip, and they do it again. And Jimmy's an example of that. He's built $5-6 million alone just from that. And it's a pain in the ass. But the reality is that the more you can de-risk your active income, and you're having to fire team members, they'll trust you more. And Tucker's an example of that. Tucker, one of the guys that works with us at Easy Button, Dan, Tucker's worked with for, I don't even know, 2 decades. I don't even know how many years, a long time.
13 years.
Yeah. So that's what you get when you can build a business that can survive the highs and lows and ups and downs. So I think that's an incredibly important point that I wanted to double click on. And then I think I want to move on to let me just
connect the dots real quick, because I kind of jumped to the investment real estate, and you circled back to where I think the first step is, right? Which is buying real estate for yourself and utilizing the skill sets of finding deals to do both. But usually the first step is find a good deal for yourself, keep it renovate it, live in it, whatever it is, then turn that around and take that tax-free money, right? And then you do that enough times, then you can build up a war chest of tax-free money without even having to buy rental real estate and use depreciation not to pay taxes. That's a huge thing in itself. And it goes hand in hand with the skill sets that we preach about, which is finding off-market deals with built-in equity.
Yeah, it's incredibly valuable. Imagine you guys, all these deals you're wholesaling, imagine just once every 2 years, you buy one of them that is 70 cents on the dollar that needs some value add. And then you do the value add. And now you've bought an asset for 70 cents on the dollar and you increase it by another 20%. You hold it for 2 years and you sell it. Even if you're single and you're not married, that's $250,000 tax free you take off the table every 2 years. And if you're in your 20s, like I am, let's say you do that for 20 years. And I know once you have kids in a family, it's harder to move them around every 2 years. But let's say in theory, you can do that even 5 times. Even if you're single, you create well over $1 million tax free. And now you have the experience of also turning those properties. You become a real estate professional and things can get really fun. But yeah, I think that was a good double.
Think about this in the state of Oregon, because it's a very highly taxed state. One of the reasons that I left, but you would have to make over $500,000 a year in order to take home $250 or a little less, really, after all the taxes are paid, especially if you live in Multnomah County. So, you're basically making $250, you're keeping $250, whereas, that guy on TikTok has to go, to work all year long and then hand the IRS basically half of what he made, right?
Especially if they're self-employed. And I think that's another perk of being in business is that you have more control over. Not more control, but reality is when you run a business, there's more ways to take tax deductions. So, that's going to be a different show. But I want to move into the latter episode of kind of building a foundation. We've talked about fixing the active income problem, sticking with something for a long time, building a core team, choosing a market, staying in your lane, mastering that. We've talked about how that kind of then pivot as your career goes into this, maybe the second decade, into wealth preservation, through buying your own properties off market, eventually doing other kinds of bigger deals. But then I want to talk about the last piece, which I think is very important, which is mindset. And Tucker, we've made a whole several video part of our kind of licensing platform on mindset. But for you, what is the mindset someone has to take to have a 10, 20, 30-year career in real estate beyond just the tactical pieces of preserving wealth and building active income?
I think you just have to, you got to show up most every day, right? And just you have to train your brain to deal with bigger problems over time, right? Like the more money, more problems, right? That's always the truth. It's just what kind of problems you're dealing with. And so, the more real estate you own, the more tenant and property issues you could deal with. The more complex your tax situations can be. It's just, but if you don't train yourself along the way, you never actually graduate to that point, right? A lot of people, and I have, some close family members that are very much like this. They never push outside the walls of comfort, right? And so I always try and push the comfort zone for myself so that eventually it feels comfortable way outside of what I thought before. But I think that's a big thing because people don't like to do that. And, that's probably the biggest mindset thing that you can have, especially as a business owner, because you're going to have challenges, right? Like if you put a guy that's been in real estate 1 year and you sat him in my seat or your seat, and said, do this job for the next week, we'd probably come back to the office and we'd see him in the corner rocking himself, just because they hadn't trained their brain to deal with these bigger problems in a way that doesn't completely derail, your life or your week or whatever. So I think that's a real big thing. You just have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that's, that goes for anything, but real estate specifically, because the dollar figures are bigger. The problems feel bigger a lot of times. It's just kind of the way that it is.
Yeah, I wrote down a few here. I think one is stress resiliency and capacity for stress.
Same thing, right? Yeah,
exactly. On your point. And, I like the analogy I've heard on a podcast before of like the longer you're in business and the bigger you build, the more money you make, the thinner the oxygen is. And a lot of people suffocate because they get there too quickly and they don't build it the right way. And the example for me, I remember when I was training for basketball before I was going to go off for the first year of college, my buddy and I, we used to go up and trail run with these like Marshawn Lynch, like oxygen deprivation masks, where it just like makes it 2 to 3 times harder to breathe. But then I would take that off and go on the court and it was a piece of cake. Right. And that's to me how business is, at least for me, every level we go up, I feel like I'm suffocating for a good while, sometimes a year, sometimes longer, sometimes it's a month, but a period of time where I feel like I'm suffocating. but then that kind of comes off and it feels easy again. And then you stretch again. And I think for most people, the confidence that being in business and choosing a lane for 10 years gives you is you don't really fear going back to zero anymore. To a certain extent you do, you want to protect yourself. But like for me, I think what's enabled me to really push outside my comfort zone, especially in the last 12, 24 months, is I have confidence in my skills. And that's really the unlock that you get from sticking with something for that long. And then to your point, Tucker made a really important point that I talk about a lot with our clients, is that not letting your business impact your personal. And to me, one of the major reasons that entrepreneurs get in relationship issues, addiction, whatever it may be, is business is this, no matter at what level you get to, up and down. And if you take that home with you every single day, it's impossible to sustain a healthy personal life on top of your business, especially as it grows, because the problems only get bigger. So I think those are really valuable and maybe the most important part of the episode today. So Tucker, anything to wrap up before we move into outro?
No, I think we got it all, really. That last thing you said is important, though. And you can't, when you first start your business or you become self-employed in real estate, you're going to take your work problems home with you for a while. And so that's an acquired skill too, right? Like that's not something you can just turn on and turn off. I mean, that took me years to figure out how to separate church and state there, right? Even in just not letting the stress of work ruin your personal life or personal life experiences or time with, loved ones, family, whatever. So that's an acquired skill. So if you guys don't feel like you can do that yet, it's all right. We're all a work in progress, but you just get better and better at it with time.
Absolutely. Definitely agree with that. Well, you guys, thanks for sticking around for another show. As always, you can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts, whether that be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else. We're also on YouTube for the video podcast if you enjoy watching the video alongside the audio. As always, a review, a share means the world. We grow through you telling your friends about the show. We don't do any kind of paid marketing behind the show as of today. And then reach out on any platform. We're pretty responsive to show ideas. You guys do oftentimes guests you want to see. We don't do a lot of guest shows, but we're not closed off to it. And then as I always say, which especially is important after this show, you're only one deal away.